Welcome to Startup Dads, a podcast about the highs and lows of building a business and raising a family at the same time. For more information about the topics we cover on the podcast and other Startup Dads related content, you can follow us on Twitter at StartupDadsPod. I'm Amrit, co-founder of Hyperexponential, a tech startup that I co-founded in 2017. It's grown from a two-person team working out of my kitchen to a profitable business with several large clients and more than 20 team members across London and Europe. I'm also dad to Evie, my first child, who was born last December. In this week's episode, I'm welcoming Justin Small. He's the founder of the Future Strategy Club, a creative agency that's challenging the traditional agency model. We discuss purpose-driven business and the different ways we can leave a legacy for the world and our kids. Justin, can you tell us a little bit about the Future Strategy Club, what it does, how it works, and what your mission is?
Yeah, so I started the Future Strategy Club 2.5 years ago. My background is agency and consultancy. And I guess the idea of the Future Strategy was to change the model of agencies, which my experience of that in the last few years that I was in working in agencies, kind of my role was Chief Strategy Officer, that kind of area, was that they were becoming, I guess, investment vehicles for marketeers to kind of set up and every 3 years then sell up to the groups. And not that that's a bad thing in any way, but what it did affect was the craft and the quality of the work and really the commitment to delivering, great work for clients. And so I guess I wanted to start an agency that had a purpose from the beginning, that purpose being to just really deliver amazing work for clients, but also not to set up a business that was immediately for sale. And as we're talking about children, one of the big ideas was around why don't people leave their businesses to their children anymore? Why is there no longevity in business? Why is it all about just very quickly creating value and then selling on and moving off? One of the big elements of a consultancy is obviously your fixed costs of hiring and keeping consultants and creatives. The model of the FSC is really a members club model of a consulting agency. So we have about 300 plus members, split between very senior C-level advisors and specialists executing creatives. But the key difference, I guess, is that we build teams around briefs instead of giving briefs to teams. And there's a cliche that is, you get these amazing people in the pitch, and then as soon as you sign on the dotted line, they'll disappear onto other projects and you get everyone that's left. The FSC is a club, Future Strategy Club. The back end of it is actually around the future of work and really supporting freelancers as the future of work. We offer them learning and development, we offer them legal advice, we create the social kind of elements that are usually part of being part of an agency consultancy of the parties. And we're trying to create a club that is kind of really the home of where you would stay as a freelancer that you can come back to. And then I guess the final piece is actually that development of our members. We have an incubator. We kind of do pre-seed, so we support our members' ideas at pre-seed level to try to get them up to a point where they can get investment. Obviously, COVID has stopped a lot of things we were doing physically because we want to be an agency on the high street, want to open ourselves up to the community and bring the creative skills to the community. And I guess that goes back to what I started with, which is that idea of what are businesses for in society is one big question I've always had. The apprentice kind of idea of business just makes me a bit sick in the stomach, to be honest. The idea that business is all about really trying to rip someone off to get the most money out of doing the least amount. And all the kind of tasks they do in apprentice actually show that. You try to create something and fake it with marketing and get money and move on. And I see business as rooted in its community. Usually what businesses do is they build a brand, they create enough profit, and then possibly as they get bigger, they move offshore and pay no more taxes. And I kind of feel that there's another version of business that is developing now, which is focused and rooted in the community, supporting the community, making profit, obviously, very important, but using some of those profits to really kind of build connections with the community and help our communities grow with us. And so I guess that's the differentiator for us as an agency, is that we're not just trying to make money. We want to use some of that money to support other people to grow and build their own businesses and hopefully to build the community in which we live.
So many bits for me to unpack there on the startup side and the dad side. You talked a little bit there about, wanting to build a business that doesn't become what you abhorred in your previous life. And I
Mm.
remember talking to you very early on in the FSC's life about the structure you put in place. You wanted to create something that really existed for the long haul. And I think you touched on something really interesting about, there's a very cliched idea now that startups are not familial in nature. The high performing sports team versus the family challenge. And that's a really interesting point because there are definitely aspects of family dynastic legacy that helps you build a business for the really, really long haul. And, I'm a long time fan of the English cricket team. I'm not going to say long suffering anymore because, we're doing pretty well. But there have certainly been times where having as the strategy of running a business like a sports team certainly isn't the best in the best interests of creating something great. So I suppose I wanted to unpack a little bit with you the structure you've got. You've got this really fascinating combination of benefits, kind of corporate or corporation style benefits, and a members club. But you want to also make a really long term business. So, what's been great about that, and what's been really difficult?
I guess the biggest challenge is not taking investment to kick off, or not taking investment that comes with a kind of a pound of flesh at the end of it. Obviously, once you take investment in any business, especially an agency, that investment wants its return in a set time period, and therefore, in order to return that investment, you have to make certain decisions based on very commercial strategy, which is fine. But when you want to build a kind of, I guess, a movement or a community, sometimes, we had to build the community first. So there was no point me starting this and going out to a load of business saying, hey, I've got this new agency, when I didn't have any capacity because I had no members in the club, and I didn't have the money to hire people, obviously permanent. So we spent a year and a half doing, I don't know, you were next door to us, you probably heard them, events, like 2-3 events a week sometimes. We did dinners, we did speaker events, we did parties, we did live music gigs as well, all trying to kind of attract the kind of amazing talent that the UK has, creative talent. And we also did high-end kind of, we called drink tank dinners, where we invited really C-level people, clients and kind of consultants to come and have a 3-course meal, and we had a presentation. And so we kind of had to kind of create a brand within these two communities, the kind of the director level and the kind of more kind of lead kind of designers, creative directors, that level as well. And that took quite a long time and a lot of kind of, actual kind of proper work, because setting up for parties and all that kind of stuff is hard work. And then having to at 2 in the morning clean up as well. So that it was really fun, but the difference is that if I had an investor at that point, they would have been, going crazy, because where's the sales, where's the numbers? And I did have friends telling me, what the hell are you doing? We've talked about the belief and the unknown of when you will start a business. You can write plans as much as you want, but you really don't know a lot of stuff. And I mean that, and then you don't know the future, but you also don't know the basics of running a business.
Absolutely.
I come from consultancy, so I know a lot about branding, about disruption and transformation, but tax and legal and stuff. So you learn, and you learn. You have to learn very quickly, and that's one of the major challenges. But one of the major challenges is not taking investment, which is good now, but then was very difficult, and building that community from scratch. My take on this was always to go brand first, because you build loyalty, and then you can almost kind of put the service in the middle of that.
Now you have the businesses up and running and that flywheel is spinning. Has it changed the role of that community? Is it still acting as that catalyst? I suppose that's a difficult question to ask in the time of COVID. But I'm fascinated by this because lots of people talk about this in the startup world now, particularly in the more consumer facing aspects of startup, that if you're building a technology product, actually, the most important thing is your users, and building a community of really enthusiastic people who believe in your product is as important as building the product itself. And so I see lots of analogies between that and what you've done. I'm just interested in how it works now, because obviously you're much more than just a product, right? You're providing a whole set of services to clients.
Yeah, I guess the change is quite a big change for us. We do not want to be only a digital platform. We want to be a physical space. And that's what we're going towards. But obviously, we had to stop that. And in one way, that's difficult. In the other way, though, our 300 kind of plus platform is now become a global set of talents that can be used anywhere in the world, which is and also our kind of distributed, kind of very lean model of running a consulting agency has come into its own, in COVID, because whereas before COVID, we'd get a bit of pushback from large corporates around the model. They'd be interested, but they would ultimately go for the kind of standard. Once COVID and everyone closed down, then it didn't really matter having 7 people from different parts of the world on a call, as long as you're delivering the work. So that helped, but we are desperate to go back to build that community. That's been a challenge, but we have built up. We're kind of opening, hopefully in LA in the next few months, and trying to start a same thing there with some members that we have, like 5 or 6 members in LA at the moment, who we're hoping to create a branch, and in New York as well. So it's kind of a kind of movable feast in some ways. For us, it's actually been quite beneficial in a few ways.
Yeah, it's fascinating the way it's definitely catalyzed a bit of a pivot. You must feel like you're ready to fire out the traps back into the real 3-dimensional world. We certainly do at HX as well. You learn through the baptism of fire what really works about remote and what doesn't. And as you say, it's been very, very difficult for lots of people, but I feel like you've made it through lots of lessons learned. So I want to pivot back to the dad's part. You've had children long before you set up the FSC. How did that figure in your choice to go it alone? Or did it?
Did it? No, my kids are listening. Actually, for me, it's probably different to you because I'm a bit older than you. I was working in an agency, probably on the kind of board as a partner. I'm 49 now. I was probably 47 then. Probably nearly the oldest person in that agency. And it seems to be an accepted part of the creative industries that as you get older, you end up not doing work and you lose the skills, you lose your tools, and that didn't really work for me. Obviously, the fear of having a mortgage and having kids and starting new business, but I can't say that I ever felt kind of 100% safe in a perm job. I think perm jobs, as maybe has turned out, are the least safe place to be, because you're relying on someone else to pay you, and when they stop paying you, you are thrown into with you're not ready. Whereas freelancers are always kind of on the hunt, they're always ready, and so when the pandemic or this kind of disruption comes, they kind of take it in their stride. Yeah, it's difficult, but they're not being thrown out onto kind of the pile with a load of other 48, 7-year-olds all trying to find the same jobs, which actually would have been very scary, I guess. So to answer your question, I don't really think I thought about around this as a risk against the kids. I think in some ways I would think the other way, that I do it for my kids because I want to build something that possibly, not necessarily they take over, but that creates some more security for them than a perm job, which I don't see having any. Really, I don't know how it worked for you, but there's always days in this where you just lose the kind of set. You get a view of the possibilities where things can go wrong, and it kind of freezes you for a couple of days. And I've learned to just let those kind of feelings flow over me, and they go away after a while, and then you continue. But I just think it's the fear, that unknown of 2-3 clients drop out in one go. Boom, there's nothing here. And if you think about it too much, you wouldn't do anything, to be honest, I guess.
It's very true. It's really interesting to hear you say that. I think there's something that I've noticed when I talk to founders, that they have, successful ones particularly, that they have in common, is that their decision to set up a business didn't really feel like a choice. They knew they needed to do it. It was something they wanted to do. I'm sorry, this is definitely Startup Dad's podcast, isn't it? Because my daughter is right on cue.
In the background.
It's kicking up a fuss. She's reflecting on my decision to set up Hyper Exponential. But it was something they had to do, and it was like an ineffable compulsion inside them that drove them to do this. And we work with a mix of contractors, freelancers, and we have perm team members at HX. And there are different types of freelancers, I think, in the world. There are some people who do it they see themselves as embedded employees, but under a different structure. And they've made different choices about the financial transaction that they want to make with a business, but broadly they feel like they're doing a job within a company. And then you've got people who really want to own their own destiny, and they're companies of one, and craftspeople. And those people by far have been, the most well prepared, in my view, for this sort of thing. Probably better prepared than the bigger organizations, quite frankly. And that's been really interesting to reflect on. How do you think about kind of purpose and passion? I look at FSC and it's a very, very clearly, proudly, or, borderline brashly mission-driven business. And how does that feed into the way you go about your work, and also actually the way you raise your kids?
It's quite a cliche now, purpose-driven business, isn't it? Everyone jumps on the bagwagon. I guess if you're gonna take the risks that you take when you leave a well-paid job, which is relatively easy, and you get weekends off and you go home at 5:30. If you're gonna do that, then either you're doing it for a passion, a thing that is driving you, and a byproduct of that is probably the profits or whatever comes out of it in terms of financial benefits, or you're leaving because there's just a pure financial kind of opportunity that you're taking, which has nothing to do with your passion. But you can see that if you do it for 5 years, you'll be set and you can go and do whatever you want of that. The second one, unfortunately, for my wife and my kids, has never really got me out of bed. It just doesn't. And it's a shame that I can't do anything that is pure financially driven. But the first one, the passion, is I guess the only way I can really force myself to work 80 to 100 hours a week, is that I and the fear, obviously, of failure. There's some amazing people and we create some amazing stuff in the UK, and just being represented by all these amazing talented people, being represented by these agencies that have no other purpose than to the founders to make enough money to buy a boat in Marbella or whatever they do with it, just seems wrong, or seemed wrong, and still seems very wrong to me. The members that we have are all kind of almost like carpenters in some ways. They have a trade, they have a practice that they've spent a lot of time putting a lot of effort into perfect. And when you work in an agency that doesn't give a shit about that really, and just wants you to knock it out and get the money in, that's just really disappointing. It's just a really shit way to do your job. And if there's more agencies like us that want to base it around craft and quality and care, the better it is for the industry. There'll always be the profit-led ones, and I don't think that's a problem, but I wanted to give creative people and consultants a place to call home that actually fitted their values. The kind of Animal Farm thing where agencies set up and write values on the wall, and they usually like, we're human, we care, whatever they are, and then they paint over them as those values aren't useful. The same as not working with big oil or tobacco. When that comes in and it's worth a couple of million, you'll find that values are only values if they cost you money. You can say values all the want, but as soon as you have to give up a contract with whatever, BAT or BP, worth £1 million, that's when you find out what your values are.
It's really true. It's really, really interesting. And it's always the very difficult choice. I think that's a really powerful litmus test. It's very difficult in the face of lots of uncertainty and fear of the unknown at the beginning to stick to your values. But I suppose I'm keen to push on the door of, how that plays out to your children, and when you're trying to teach them values. And, the modern education system is heavily diversified in the UK, right? You learn lots and lots of subjects. You can, if you want to, incrementally inch forward, being as good as geography as you are design technology or whatever it is. Apart from obviously wanting all your kids to always be brilliant at as many things as is humanly possible, how does that influence you when you look at the things your kids love, what they're doing, what they're going after? In an era, as you rightly say, where you can be a craftsperson at the age of 17 or 18 if you want to. I mean, Evie's got a few years left, so I'm putting that off personally. But but I don't think yours may be a little bit closer to that.
Well, it's interesting because I just got 3 texts just before we started recording from my son downstairs, and those texts are, can I sign up to Bitcoin now with your information?
That's fantastic.
So brilliant. And because he's got time in between lessons, and he's looking at houses in Hawaii, and basically has decided that if he becomes a surgeon or a doctor and he has to earn like over 200,000, he can get a visa in Hawaii. And he's found the house. He showed me the house with a swimming pool, and he does a lot of that. It's just kind of weird. And I'm just telling him, and so look, you're kind of looking at the end goal and not looking at the journey, because that journey is probably 15 years of training, medic. But it's a really interesting question, actually, Amrit, because I don't think I've really thought about how do I think about my kids. I guess I come from, I think, the only kid in my whole family to go to university, kind of where I grew up in a pub in Torremolinos, but I was lucky enough to go to an amazing school that drove me to go to university, which I had to kind of fund myself because I lived in Spain and couldn't get any grant or something. Those kind of struggles just being part of it. And I guess from that comes my expectation that my kids will push hard not necessarily again for money, because that's not what I particularly am interested in, although I kind of like the security of it, but maybe not the just complete drive, is that they find something that Monday mornings they want to go and do. And that you can never find something that is always amazing, but if 80% of the time you're learning and believe in what you're doing, then the byproduct of that is financial gain, hopefully security, because I don't think you need to be millionaires. I don't think it makes much difference as long as you're able to fulfill the kind of four stages of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I guess. So I guess your question will actually I'll start to understand the answer as my son, he's 13, so he'll be choosing his GCSEs in a year and a half or whatever. As he starts to do that, and weirdly, we don't, we've been talking to them about being doctors and stuff and doing medicine. And I just feel, as I think about that, I'm thinking actually I'm looking for them to do those kind of jobs that will give them a complete kind of amazing platform to go anywhere in the world, and to then go into any amazing area that they want to add on to after doing medicine. And that's really traditional, isn't it? And I find myself probably being quite traditional in an old sense of I want them to do like my wife's an artist, and it's like, yeah, you can do that on the side, but you can't be an artist. No, absolutely not. That's really odd, that, but yeah.
I mean, I think your point, it really resonates with me about you can't focus on the outputs, right? Because the outputs are only what you get after you do the inputs, right? And I think it's one of those things, it comes back to your point about the boat in Marbella thing, right? Becoming a founder, setting up a business because you love the idea of being a billionaire is a terrible idea. It's like going to the gym and expecting that just going to the gym is going to make you, a world-class powerlifter or whatever it is. What makes you a world-class powerlifter is pain and suffering over 20 years, right, of actually doing the exercise. And the same thing goes for business and school, right? If you're not incentivized to put the work in, you get nothing out of it in lots and lots of different ways. Pivoting us completely away from that. Again, you picked up, you're incredibly driven, one of the most driven founders I know. And you work a really, really intense, longer than average work week, even for a founder, I would say. Do you use a routine? Are you a stickler for a routine? How do you balance that with work and family, particularly working in the industry that you do? Do you have any hacks or tips for how you do that?
That's a really good question. Is there a routine? There's a lot of different types of work, isn't there, in a day-to-day as a founder? There's all the kind of admin stuff and the tax stuff and the contract stuff. You're just trying to build, sales. You're trying to deliver projects. You're trying to hire people. And the kind of running of the business is something you usually wouldn't be doing once you get to a certain size and you can get people in to do it. It kind of goes in ups and downs. I have no... especially the creative stuff just happens when in certain moments. And how does that fit into a schedule with kids? I do actually find myself that I'm very good at, so obviously some weeks I can work weekends and evenings and stuff. It naturally comes to me that I just switch off sometimes, and I naturally, I think, protect myself from burnout by just, even if I've got a load on, I just switch off. And that doesn't always happen, but I find a lot of time that I'm just doing it naturally. I'll focus on making sure that I'm around, and then when I have to, I will work weekends. And so that balance comes naturally in some way. Obviously, when you're in financial distress, in the sense that you don't have the kind of much in, and you can see only 3 months ahead, I think that drives a lot of real hard work because you're scared. And I think fear is one. It's not very nice, but that drives a lot of probably overworking and some of the burnout, the kind of anxiety that comes from running businesses and that comes ebbs and flows, luckily.
Yeah, I think your point about ebbs and flows is so true. We had some really interesting training last year. We had a third-party speaker about just being resilient through, the pandemic and the challenges, the unprecedented challenges we've seen. And they made the really, really great point that sport is a great analogy for many things, right, including business, and about how world-class athletes plan to peak. Right, they plan to peak, and that involves periods of downtime and uptime. By definition, if you're sustaining a level of output, it can't be your maximum level of output. For me, I, just like you, I really struggle to turn it down. I find that very difficult, and that's the cliche that happens a lot with founders. But also that sense of opportunity cost, right, is keeping you just really focused on what could happen next, and actually thinking a little bit about wanting to be in the right shape for the opportunity when it comes. was a really good framing for me to think a little bit about that. Thinking about how restorative time with family and your kids is. It's something that's helped me a lot find that balance. And I definitely, I can definitely relate to the ebbs and flow. I'm definitely jealous of you though for doing that naturally, because I'm terrible at that. But in my calendar, I have EV time. Yeah, it shouts me in the face in capital letters, 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock. Like that's the most sacred time I've got, and I'm not going to get it back. So stop. And I'm mindful now that gives me 12 minutes, doesn't it? But that's fine. We can work with that.
Yeah, I mean, the other stress of that, like the way I do it, is that I never feel I'm working hard enough, actually. And actually, the last few weeks, I feel that I was doing what normal people do, watching a bit of TV after dinner and, just watching a bit of whatever I was watching. And I suddenly realized I'm not getting enough done. I need to be working during the week, even if it's a couple of hours, just to set your mind for the next day, which I was doing before. And I kind of suddenly just allow myself to have a break. And then suddenly I catch myself and think, actually, I got to work harder. And so it is the kind of the dilemma of working for yourself, whether as a contractor, but I think as a founder, there's no end to how much work you can do. You can never stop. You can always be doing more. The cliche about American kind of if you work hard enough, everything is possible. It's not true, though. You can work hard enough on loads of things, and it'll never go anywhere. And I think that's a big part of being a founder, is knowing when the path you're taking up that mountain is going to end in a dead end, and trying to make decisions.
Absolutely. Okay, my last one for you. What's the biggest lesson that you've learned from your journey so far as an entrepreneur that you want to pass on to your children?
It's not a small question, is it?
I said I've got EV time, and now I've dropped that bomb on you. So,
the biggest lesson that I have learned, the key element, is that it's a never-ending learning. So, what I would never want my children to do is choose a career that had no growth in it. I guess if there was a lesson, it would be, don't choose jobs that within 2 years you'll be experts at. Choose jobs that will take you a lifetime to be experts, and that you never become an expert. That's probably why we're focusing our children on STEM. They happen to be quite good at maths for some reason. I don't think I was, but STEM leads you, especially in the next 20, 30 years, I guess, leads you into areas where you can be creative and form a career that builds on itself over many years, and you just get better and better. If you do 30 years of being in medicine, 30 years time, you have built a career and a bank of knowledge, which is amazing. The trouble with being an artist is that you can do 30 years of being an artist, and it's still very subjective, your output. And that's really kind of difficult to see my kids in that situation. Even my wife went down that, and it is amazing. But if you spend 30 years on something, I would want to see, you've kind of got somewhere. It's built on. You're recognized for that time. So a job that you can never be a full expert. So really big areas, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. That's really, really great. Before I let you go, I would like, though, to take you through our Startup Shoutout section, which is our non-sponsored section where we call out startups, founders, or early stage businesses that have caught our eye and deserve a bit of free promotion.
Startup Shoutouts.
So my startup shout-up is the Good Gym. You join up and you go for a run, but on your run, you stop off at, say, an old person's house, an isolated person's house, to have a chat and a cup of tea, and then you carry on with your run, or you do it in groups and you go and help someone move a piece of furniture that can't move it as a team, or you go and help do a bit of their gardening. So it's all about, in some ways, connecting exercise to helping kind of deal with this kind of isolation pandemic, that we have, where there's a big percentage of people in the country that don't see anyone for months on end. That combination of those ideas, I think, is so it's so heartwarming in some way, that I just love to kind of have come up with that idea and run that business. There's something so beautiful about it. And it, to me, going back to right at the beginning when I was talking about what is the purpose of business, that is one of the purposes of business. These kind of creative ideas that can create revenue for a business that can then drive that kind of outcomes. It just makes me think good of business, which is sometimes quite hard to do because of some of the things that some businesses do that are set up. So yeah, the Good Gym. Join
That's
it.
great. No, it sounds like a really vital service in the true sense of the word, and as you say, deserves a good boost when we can do that. So my startup shout out this week is a service called Fresh Fitness Food. Very different from the Good Gym, although I suppose nutrition being a key part of good health. And they are, I think, London-based predominantly at the moment, food delivery service for people who are extremely busy but also trying to eat healthily. And I found them an absolute lifeline while I try and scale HX, look after EV, and have more than 35 seconds of spare time a day. You talk to them about the goals you want to achieve from any sports you're doing, your food diet preferences, and they will deliver food to you every day, which is healthy and tasty and nutritious and varied. And it's a sort of thing that is well worth it in the context of it being very easy to reach for a takeaway and food waste and all of those sorts of things. They're heavily invested in sustainability. Their food packaging, for example, is recyclable. It's really, really great. They're all around great service. So that's mine today. And we'll be sure to follow up from our Twitter to promote links to where you can find out a little bit more about the Good Gym and Fresh Fitness Food. Well, Justin, look, thank you so much for your time today. How can we find a little bit more out about you and the FSC? What's the best way for us to reach out to you?
futurestrategy.club is our website, and we were in Peckham Levels with you, next to you, and I would say come down and see us, but you can't right now. So yeah, hopefully in summer we'll be back doing dinners and parties and everything, because that would be great. But yeah, the website is probably the easiest. We're on obviously Twitter, LinkedIn, and those kind of things.
I thoroughly recommend reaching out if you're a freelancer, because Justin does some absolutely great stuff, and his team. That's a wrap today. If you want to know a little bit more about the podcast, what we're doing, you can send us a message on Twitter at StartupDadsPod. Love to hear from you, and potentially join our Facebook group. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you for having me on. Brilliant.
Many thanks to today's guest. You'll find links to them and their work in the show notes. To join our community of parent founders, head over to the Startup Dads Facebook group.